and pull up the chat as well. Should be live on Instagram. Looks like LinkedIn's going too. Great. Cool stuff. All right, folks. Well, I think we're good to go. I am going to put the link to my newsletter, which is generally what I talk about on these Monday night streams, so that'll be in the chat. If you can do me a favor as you're joining, so I know the chat is working, because I basically never trust it at this point. If you're able to, leave me a note in the chat so I can see it coming through. Say hello, because I'm happy to see all of you. These conversations are meant to be conversations. It's not just a recorded YouTube video, so I'm more than happy to be taking questions as I go. That's actually my preference. So I am watching on Instagram. I'm watching on TikTok. People Wave, awesome, from Twitch. Hello. Hey, Infected FPS, it's good to see you back. Hello, Giovanni on Instagram. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for letting me know the chat's working. Again, if you're on other channels, come say hi. Like I said, it's hard to trust. I've seen it a couple times now where someone's like, hey, you didn't respond to my message. And I'm like, oh, crap, I never saw it coming through. So, Giovanni, yes, you are from Instagram, and I do appreciate you being here. So that's awesome. Cool. I think all the chat is working for now. But by all means, if I'm going through the topics today, if you were trying to ask me a question, I couldn't see it, I didn't get to it, shoot me a message in my DMs. I'm happy to try and respond to get stuff answered for you. So I'd much rather, like I say on all these streams, I'd want to make time to answer stuff you want to talk about. And if that means derailing from the current point of discussion, that's cool. Just say what you got to say in the chat. We'll jump over to it. So, the topic for this discussion today, at least as a guiding principle, is going to be my previous newsletter, which last week was celebrating 4 years at Microsoft for me. So I wanted to be able to talk through this because it's a good opportunity for me to reflect, because most of my career is not at Microsoft. Most of my career is in fact from startups, which is cool. It's a very different space to be in, and I thank you. I appreciate that. It's a different space, right? So I know that folks that often tune into these, not everyone, right? But I think there's a lot of folks that join in to check out and see what it's like being in software engineering. You're either perhaps aspiring to be a software engineer or a junior software engineer and kind of want to see how things are, or if you are a junior software engineer, you're trying out some space. Maybe you're at a startup, maybe you're in big tech and you got in, and you're just curious what it's like to be in these other environments. So I want to make sure that I can take this opportunity in this conversation to share my different perspectives, kind of going through both. But like I said, more experience bias for being in startups and more recency bias, of course, for being in big tech here at Microsoft. So that's going to be the framing for today. And I will remind folks again, because I see more people joining the stream, please do ask questions about anything that you're interested in. If there's time at the end of this, generally I jump over to Reddit and pick a couple of topics from experienced devs to like that subreddit to kind of talk through and offer some perspective on it. So I'm going to try to go all the way for the full 2 hours here. I started CrossFit with my wife, and she goes very early in the morning. So if I basically get to sleep at 11, and then I get my 6 hours of sleep for bright and early at CrossFit in the morning, which I think I've completed all the way through 3 workouts now. I've been bodybuilding for like 20 years, and I made it 3 minutes into my first CrossFit workout and almost blacked out. So cardio is apparently not my strong suit, but that's okay, because today we're talking about big tech and startups. So with that said, yeah, great. Thanks, D. Thompson Dev. Just Googled who is the coolest dev on the internet and it brought me to your stream. Well, I appreciate that. I'll try to keep live up to that name. But yeah, let's dive into things. So again, I hope it's still in the chat, but my newsletter is there. And I'm going to kind of go through the content just because that's how it's organized. But I wanted to start off by by giving a little bit of history for myself, right? Because like I said, I'm at Microsoft now, but that's not where I spent the majority of my career. And for me, I went to university, so I kind of took that like air quotes like traditional software engineering path, college, university kind of thing. For me, and I like offering this context too because I don't say that because I'm trying to sound like elitist or something because that's the only way to do it. Hello, Maria. Good to see you. I haven't chatted with you in a while, so it's awesome to see you here. For me, university and software engineering, this was an important combination because in Canada, and there are other places in the world, but in Canada and especially in Ontario, there is a governing body for engineering. And that means that if you want to be a professional software engineer or a professional engineer of any kind, you do need to go to an accredited school. You need to pass an ethics exam, and you need to have, I think it's 2 years of experience under another professional engineer. And then you do all of this, and then you're paying dues every year. Like literally, you're paying money to keep your professional engineering designation. So for me to become like this was my goal, right? I want to be a professional engineer, which is like being classified as a lawyer or a doctor. In this case, an engineer. It's a professional designation in Ontario and other places in the world too. But that's why I went for computer engineering. So, accredited program, and that was kind of how I started things off. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because my program, I was very fortunate that I had what's called a co-op program. And in a couple more interviews that I've done recently, internships and co-op has come up a little bit more, which is cool because I've almost forgotten that this is something to be talking about with aspiring software engineers. If you have the opportunity to go do an internship, 100% I recommend doing this so much. I know for myself at the University of Waterloo, this is one of the benefits of universities and colleges. And I'm not saying boot camps don't have this, some absolutely will, but some schools are literally set up with internship programs and cooperative programs. So at the University of Waterloo, they had these relationships with companies. Companies would register to be on their portals, right? They register to be on their portal so that students can go apply for jobs. And then that way it makes your job search a little bit easier. But other, boot camps or other colleges and university might just have relationships with more local companies or big companies that are nearby. And that way you can kind of get like funneled in for internships and things like that. So internships were sort of like the number one thing that made me stay in school. I feel like I probably would have been like, I don't really know if I'm cut out for this. But then I would go for an internship and I'd be like, oh man, I love software. Like I love programming. This is definitely the spot. So I can't recommend them enough. Giovanni on Instagram says, what was the most difference changing from startup university to big tech? I'm going to get to this in just a moment. I'm just doing my preamble, but that's going to be the biggest focus for this conversation. So Giovanni, I will absolutely get to that. And I'm not sure how to pronounce your name on Instagram. Panea Otiego, good to see you. Hello, this is me waving. So I had this opportunity to do internships. I actually had 6 internships, which was 2 full years of work experience. So Kelsey Ocean, how about apprenticeships? Yes, this might look different depending on, your setup, whether it's how it's done through school or what different companies are offering you. My point is that any opportunity you can to try and secure some type of call it like it's generally like a shorter term guided work experience with a company. If you're a boot camp student, if you're a college or university student, whatever, any opportunity like that, I highly recommend going after. And if it's not something that's just offered at school for you or your boot camp or whatever, please do try and seek these things out because the opportunities do exist. And just like if you're applying for jobs looking for full-time, you should be trying to seek these things out because they're such amazing experiences. Infected FPS is saying, I wish I'd done more internships while I was in school. I was mostly not confident in my skills at the time. Yep, so I never did any until my senior year. So for me, it was a forcing function in school. So I can appreciate that Infected FPS because when I started university, because it was a co-op program, literally the first couple of weeks of being in university, like we're kind of, you move away from home. For me, this was the first time doing anything like this. I've always been at home. And you join this school, everyone's new, you're a total stranger to everyone, a completely different place, trying to go to classes. And then they go, by the way, start preparing your resume because you're applying for jobs next week. And you're like, what the hell do you mean? What do you mean apply for jobs? Like, I've never worked. I don't know how to program at a company. Like, it's nuts, right? But the whole point was that they kind of forced you into this, and they gave you a lot of support to do it. So some schools are like that. Like I said, very fortunate to be have gone to the University of Waterloo, but there are other places like this as well. Please do seek these things out. Apprenticeship, co-op programs, internships, anything like that, highly recommend. So for me, at my internships, I focused a lot at small companies and startups. And I've talked about this before in newsletters and in streams, but for me, one of the big goals of that was at the smaller organizations, I felt like I'd have an opportunity to have like more impact relative to the company. I can remember early on in my internships being like, I'm not interested in the big companies. I don't know what it was. I had, classmates, a lot of them were like applying for Apple and stuff in the first couple of years. And I was like, I don't know why people are doing this. Like, it doesn't appeal to me. But to each their own. I'm sure they got paid very well doing those internships, so that's great for them. But I just kind of went the opposite direction. I wanted to work at these smaller companies. And personally, I'm so glad that I did, because at the smaller companies, it turns out that I got the experience I wanted. I was able to have, I'm going to call it like big impact. I don't know, relative to the company, maybe they were like, whatever, he's just a kid kind of thing. But I felt like my work was being seen. I felt like it was being impactful. And that's what mattered to me. So I thought that was really cool. This led me to when I graduated. I remember being like, like I've had the startup experience throughout my 5 years of university and doing these 6 internships. I'm like, I like that. That's a good feeling for me. And the place that I started working at full time, it's kind of ironic because I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn now, and it's kind of a full circle thing for me. I literally was going through my spam folder in Gmail, and I've told this story before. I've told it to the individual that I'm about to talk about, and I was going through my spam folder, and I had a LinkedIn message, and it was basically LinkedIn email. Then I had the Gmail kind of notification for it in my spam. And I was reading this, and it was about asking me to come in for a job interview. And I remember being like, hold on, like, I know it's in my spam folder, but this was written by a person. Like, it wasn't just automated. It wasn't a copy paste thing. Like, someone took the time to read my profile, and they were interested in interviewing me. So I was like, okay. And at the time, I was pursuing a couple things. I was planning on going back to one of my previous internships. I had an opportunity that I was recently talking about. I think this was to go work at Wish. I think I was trying to wait for a conversation around that. I was also considering maybe doing my MBA. But I remember being like, I have a couple things lined up, and it just felt like I have nothing to lose. Like, why not go do this interview? And it changed my life. I went in for the interview. It was for a digital forensics company. They were profitable with no investors. And I was like, okay, like that's a good sign. Because I think traditionally startups are high risk because you're like, hey, is the company going to exist in a week, a month from now? Like, what does that look like? Not having investors was very cool, and being profitable already. And it was in Waterloo, which is where I had spent my entire university life. So I decided to go pursue that. And for me, I spent the next 8 years of my life there. And I had a lot of impact at a small company that grew to hundreds of people, which is really cool. We became international. We essentially were the underdog in digital forensics, and there were a couple of like incumbents that essentially had like a monopoly, and just over time kind of took that over from them, which is super cool. So it was a really awesome experience. But I've also mentioned this before. I started managing teams there a few months into working as a software engineer. So a bit of a unique experience, but I loved being in a startup. It was awesome. So the reason I'm telling this before I kind of get into the rest of like the big tech versus startup thing, because it's the whole point of this conversation, is that I want to give you the context and the background so that you can understand where some of my biases and perspective come from. I think it's almost like unfair to start just talking about these things and comparing them without giving you that context, because you'll be like, well, dude, I don't agree with that, or that's not how I see it. That's not what I heard. Totally. Everyone's going to have a different experience. I'm not trying to say otherwise, but for me, the other thing that I want to kind of focus on here is a couple things, right? So one, that I did start off being an engineering manager very early on in my sort of full-time professional career. So had that going for me, but I was also writing code every day with my teams. So that meant that I was in the code, also managing teams. The teams that I managed were responsible for a majority of my time at this forensic company for rapidly prototyping things, starting off new products and things like that. So over those 8 years, I was building a lot of the sort of beginnings of code bases, right? I would prototype things with my teams. We would get them kicked off. And then if they had some roots, we'd go, cool. We'd spin up some more teams, put people on them, and we'd kind of move around. But I'm telling you this because the interesting thing that happened, if you kind of think through this experience, is like I was around long enough at this company that all of the new stuff we were building in the beginning, that was the legacy code. By the end of my 8-year time there, like in the last couple of years, I spent a large majority of my time going around to different teams, kind of like acting almost like a consultant about some of the legacy code, being like, hey, we tried building things this way, or people would say, hey, like, we're thinking about going in this direction. Like, what do you think? So even though I was no longer building in those areas, I had a lot of context and a lot of sort of the initial history there. And depending on, who you are and what companies you're working at, you might be on teams where you've worked with people like this. Kind of refer to them like historians, right? It sounds kind of funny, but they kind of have a lot of the context just from being around the code for so long. It's not the best spot to be in. People might say, oh, that's great job security, but like, it's not what you want for teams. So I was doing my best just to try and share as much information as I possibly could, because the analogy or the go-to is usually something about a bus coming by and taking someone out, but I try to frame that a different way and say, hey, if this person won the lottery and they didn't have to work anymore, what would happen, right? You want to make sure that you can kind of share the knowledge, make sure there's no single points of failure. So I was trying to do my best to do that. But that means my entire professional work experience up to this point, before going to big tech, startups, having a ton of domain knowledge in an area, having a ton of like the code base knowledge, and then both hands-on experience and managing teams. Okay, so that's kind of the preface for all of this. Now, we switch. So I go to Microsoft. I have not, when I started at Microsoft, I have not been building any of the original products at Microsoft. Some of the code base that I was working in was roughly as old as some of the people that were hired onto my team. There's a lot of old code in the places we're working in. It's just the reality of it. So lots of legacy code, stuff that I don't have my hands in it. As a manager at Microsoft, I am not coding at work. I code every single day outside of work, but I don't code at work. It's not part of my role. Not that they wouldn't allow me. It's just like not an expectation, and I have a lot of other things that I'm doing. So I don't code at work. The reason that I want to bring that up is because that means that I'm not going to have the same experience in the code base, not like the intimate knowledge of the code base and different products and services. I'm just not going to have it. I'm going to have to approach things in a very different way to understand them. I'm going to have to rely on my team, the experts in the team, to sort of teach me over time how these things work, really listen to them to understand where sort of the dragons in the code are and like the different historical elements to that. Yeah. Dan, that's right. Code as old as the people on the team. It's true. It's pretty fascinating to think about, but yeah, the again, the point here is just like this looked very different for me. I like to, when I reflect on like my time managing at a startup and kind of coming into to Microsoft, I would say like, and I wrote this in my newsletter, right? Like I feel like one of my, I'm gonna call it like a superpower. So some of the things that I relied on as being a successful engineering manager, I relied on the fact that I had hands-on intimate knowledge of the code base that my team was working in. When I joined Microsoft, it was kind of like almost like kryptonite, right? Like I don't have that superpower anymore. So when we talk about things like imposter syndrome, that was huge for me because I'm suddenly going, wait, I don't know this code. I can't eat like as easily relate to conversations with people on my team because I don't know the code. Um, and that's not an expectation of me, right? But that's something that I just relied on, and I had that experience from before, so that was hard. Okay, so where are we going with all this? The other thing that I'll mention related to not having experience in the code. Thank you, Mr. Shadowman. I appreciate that. The other thing that I want to mention is that I don't have the domain knowledge because that's important too. When I started off in digital forensics, I knew absolutely nothing about digital forensics. Zero. I can remember starting my first day and kind of sitting down with the CTO. There was a couple of us, and he was asking us some questions about forensics, and we're like, "Dude, no, like, don't know." But that's fine. Like, we were there to learn, and he taught us. And over 8 years, I have 2 patents that are related to digital forensics, 2 more that are pending, and I feel like they should have been granted by now. Maybe I should follow up on that. But I got to learn the domain. When I was hired on at Microsoft, I was working for the deployment team in Substrate. And for context, Microsoft 365 is sort of the area of Microsoft, but Substrate is this platform that all of the Office 365 services are built on top of. So I got to manage teams related to deployment for Substrate. I had never done, and they knew this when they hired me, for the record. It's not like I'm like I snuck through or something, but I had never done planetary scale distributed deployments ever. Not a thing. But I spent the next 3.5 years doing that. And then recently, so at the beginning of this year, I switched over to the routing plane team. And again, they hired me into that team, not having any experience with DDoS protection, firewalls, routing, none of that. But those are some of my core responsibilities now. So again, just sharing this because these are shifts in my expectations, my experience as I go through all this. Okay. But that's kind of the preamble. I know that was long-winded. I'm pretty good at rambling and going on tangents, but I think all of that is important information to kind of understand the next parts of this. And I was pretty brief, I think, in my newsletter explaining some of these things like that come up. But I think that's just because, like, I don't know, I could probably ramble about it more, but to write it, I'm like, I don't want to put people to sleep. So I'll put you to sleep on this stream. I'm just kidding. But the next part I want to talk about is pace. So pace is going to be the first sort of comparison that I want to talk about. So back to one of the questions that was on Instagram is from Giovanni. He said, what was the most difference changing from the startup universe to big tech? And one of them is pace. I think this is an important one to talk through. And the framing is like, when I was at a startup, it was like nonstop go time all of the time, super fast turnaround time. It was, and I should add, like, I never felt forced into this, so I don't like talking about this, and I don't want the perception to be, oh, that must have sucked. Like, I can't believe people made you do that. Sounds like a terrible place. For me, quite the opposite. Maybe there were some people that felt pressured into this at different points. It's not for me to speak on their behalf, but I love to work. I absolutely loved spending my time working. I'm not saying that like to brag. I just feel very fortunate that like I had a place. Like, I love the work we were doing and I love the people I work with. Right? So okay, I'm glad, Maria. I don't trying not to put people to sleep, but that's the goal, right? Please stay awake. the For me, it was very awesome that I had this opportunity to basically work as hard as I want and feel like I'm being valued for doing it. But it meant that we were, at least the people I was working with and the situations I was putting myself in, we were working a lot. We were working rapidly on things. So if we had issues, like we'd be staying up, fixing bugs, trying to ship things. Um, it was like that, like typical startup life, right? Like we would stay up super late fixing bugs, would sometimes sleep under our desk just because we're like, we got to fix this stuff in the morning. There's no point driving home now. We'd hang out after work and stuff. We were just always together, but always moving forward, trying to solve things as fast as possible. And when I say fast as possible, I don't want people to have the impression that like that meant, oh, it doesn't matter how buggy it is or anything else, because this is an important part about digital forensics. You can't mess anything up in digital forensics. If you mess anything up, the whole case that an examiner is going through in court, that data can get tossed out. Toast. Doesn't get used. And if you think about the situations that we're trying to help with, we're talking for murder trials, terrorism. We're talking about for, unfortunately, for child sexual abuse cases, things like that. So these are incredibly important. So when I say moving fast, I mean truly delivering value as rapidly as possible. It does not mean building crappy software. It does not mean shipping bugs. If we were going to have bugs, right, like we would compromise on things like, I'm going to say like usability. And what I mean by that is like, as long as people could get their job done and it's not going to be error prone or have false information, great. Does that mean we could make it faster later? Sure. Could we make it more intuitive later? Sure. But the reason that this was super important, and I don't think that some people realize this depending on the companies. Yes, this is being streamed on Twitch, by the way. If you do, sorry, this is a question in the chat. If you want, you can find me. I believe my Twitch handle is DevLeaderCA. So you can check me out, but this is being streamed on Twitch. And by the way, it is recorded. So if you need to jump at any point, this will be recorded as well. So there you go. Hopefully that helps. The thing that I think people miss is that we need to be shipping value fast to keep the company alive. It's that simple. I don't think that people realize that depending on where they're working. If you're like, hey, I work at a company and like, I don't want to say it's comfy. I don't mean to say that everyone else just must be comfy, but you don't feel like the company is going to go away if like, if you're a week late on something. Like for us, it was really like, we're trying to keep the company alive and we're trying to win in the space. I feel like the people that I was around, we wanted to be successful at what we were doing. And that meant getting value to customers as rapidly as we could, because we know the impact of that. And it meant that like every step we're taking, we were getting this feedback from our customer base that like, you guys are doing awesome. Like this is what we need in digital forensics. So I feel like it was very easy for us to be motivated to keep that fast pace up. Now, as the company grew, like, did that slow down? Yeah, there were aspects of it slowing down. When I started, there was 8 people at that company roughly. And by the time I left, there was like mid 200, 250 to 300 kind of range. So it grew. Did it slow down? Sure. There were aspects. Hey, Xcoding, good to see you. There were parts of it that slowed down for sure, but it's almost like a bit of a side effect when businesses start getting very large, more teams, more people. But I can say that I felt like in the areas I was working in, it was always trying to keep that culture of that fast pace. So I wanted to call that part out from the startup side. Very fast pace. Now, when we go to Microsoft, by the way, this isn't a criticism. I'm trying to do like just a general comparison here. If I say that it's slower pace, my intention is not to say it's because it's bad, because I think that's not fair. It's just different. So Microsoft is a ridiculously big company. And even the space I work in is a part of Microsoft, and it's ridiculously big. So when we talk about the pace of things, it's going to be slower. I'm sure there are parts of Microsoft that feel very rapid, right? And in particular, when I talk about the startup parts too, I did a lot of prototyping. I kind of mentioned that, but prototyping almost by definition is going to feel more rapid. In Microsoft, I don't do anything like that. So we have existing platforms. We have and I only have worked on platform teams and infected FPS about the corporate red tape, kind of. So I'll touch on that a little bit too. But when you work on platform teams and you have like hundreds of services that are using your infrastructure, like, sure, you want to go fast for them. Like, you want to make sure that they're getting everything they need, like, good response time and everything. But like for deployment, for example, what you don't do, because I think we saw an example of this a few weeks back, not because of Microsoft, and I don't mean to point at the company that did it, but it sounds like someone deployed some changes across the entire world pretty rapidly, and there was a problem, right? So, like in deployment, we would make sure that we are on purpose going slower. We're on purpose having a managed deployment platform that can guide other teams through this process to make sure that they catch issues. So it's almost kind of like built into some of the stuff we're doing that it will go slower. So this is part of it. Now, the other thing that I think is important, this is kind of to infected FPS's point, we talk about corporate red tape. One thing that I kind of want to put into perspective is like there were tons of teams in the space that I'm in trying to make forward progress with goals that are aligned to the business. So we will have this information provided to us from leadership and there's conversations around that. And all of these teams are going to have their version of how these goals need to be accomplished. So, like, that's going to mean that they're going to start coming up with things. They need solutions for these things. And suddenly we're going to have to start having dependencies on each other. But when you think about how many teams there are and the opportunity for dependencies to come up, you suddenly are in this position where like things start to be a little bit coupled in terms of delivery. So you're going to have these conversations about, okay, well, when are you going to get this done? What's your dependency? And these things just take time to discuss. They start to slow things down. The time horizons that we're planning for are longer. I'm trying to think at the forensic company. Like we did 2-week sprints, but like we weren't planning for like months out. Like I think the only time that would really happen for us is if we were like, hey, we have a big conference, we want to make a splash, but like it was kind of aspirational and then we would work towards that. But at Microsoft, it's like, no, we're planning for, longer periods of time. So very different that way. But just as a result, the pace is a lot slower. So I think for me, okay, there's another part to it. And because I want to talk about this from like a software engineer perspective. I'm kind of talking about it a little bit from my management perspective, but obviously more, I'm assuming more software engineers listening than folks managing. But I think something that's important to consider too is like the size of the code base, the number of products and services that are using shared libraries and things like that. You could imagine that your build times and your test suites and stuff running, they're probably going to take a little bit longer than you'd have at a startup with a smaller code base, fewer things going on. So you have these different overheads, right? Even if it's for the same types of things, they might feel exaggerated. So pace, I think, is a huge one. When I reflect on this kind of thing, I think I thrive in like more fast paced. And when I say that, again, I'm kind of thinking about this a little bit for the first time. I think I thrive in an environment like that because I think that it puts constraints on me that I have to get things done in some boundary, right? Like it's not, hey, we got to get this thing done in the next 6 months. It's like this needs a solution by the time people leave the office today. It needs a solution by the time the weekend comes. Like we need, like, the constraint of time is there. Whereas with some of these other bigger situations, it's like things can slip because other people are slipping. Like the timelines are always kind of moving out a little bit as we go, as much as we don't want them to. It's kind of a inevitable thing. So I think I thrive in environments where that's where there's sort of this constraint around that. So I think that's something I do miss about like startups. I don't think that that is impossible to have at a big tech company. I think that's entirely possible. I think it's more of how your team culture is and your larger organization's culture is. Right. So you might be working in an area, working on products where you do have that kind of like rapid turnaround and it kind of feels like a little startup within a larger company. That's totally possible. I've heard about this from other people. I haven't had that experience at Microsoft or anywhere else, but I've heard that's possible. So that's kind of my framing for pace, sort of the comparison that I want to give you on that front. I'm just checking if there's anything else. No, nothing else from my newsletter that I wanted to mention there. Okay. If you have questions about pace and sort of comparing big tech and startups, please feel free to add that in the chat. There's a lot more people on now than when I started. So if something I mentioned at the beginning is if you have questions about literally anything related to software engineering, please just ask them in the chat. I make YouTube videos, and if I just wanted to pre-record something and not engage with people, I would go do that instead. But I want these live streams to be interactive, and I would much rather answer your questions. So just a heads up, please do ask away. I am watching chat as I blab on here. So next part that I'm going to talk through is impact. So like I said, if you have anything that you wanted to bring up, just put it in the chat and I'll stop talking and go over to that. Impact is an interesting one because I think that you can frame this in different ways and it's going to have different meaning to different people. So when I think about impact, I see it as sort of two major things, and I tried to describe it. I didn't have a good way to do this, but I thought maybe it stood out when I wrote it, but I don't know if it's going to resonate with people. And awesome, someone from Ethiopia. That's so cool to see from Facebook. So thanks for joining. I appreciate you being here. I think this is awesome that we can have this type of technology that enables us to connect. So again, if you have any questions, please just ask. This is great. The impact conversation, I was trying to describe like a rectangle, and kind of laughed at myself because when I was writing this, I was like, dude, you're going to use a stupid geometry analogy to try and talk about impact, but it seemed to click for me. So the geometry analogy here is going to be about sort of like when we say impact, like how meaningful that is. And meaningful is very subjective because when I say meaningful, I mean meaningful for you. Like, do you resonate with this thing? Does it align with your values? Do you personally see this as something that you're like, wow, I'm passionate about this? Like, there's meaning behind it. But that's very subjective and for you to decide. So, not for me to say, but for you. And the one that I like to talk about that I mentioned in my newsletter, and I've already said it on this stream, but the digital forensics company, something that was like, pardon me, something that was really impactful for me was because there was so much meaning in the forensic work. The fact that we could help save children from predators, like I personally, and this again, it's subjective, I cannot think of anything that resonates as more impactful for me. That just, that's my my stance on it. I can't think of anything to be able to help save kids. So when we talk about like this rectangle framing that I want to show is like, if we have two axes, my one axis is very tall because it's so impactful. Now, the other part is kind of like the volume, right? So in our case, yes, we could have more volume of impact the more sales we're making, the more people that are using our software, the more that we can go help other people, because we're helping law enforcement, we're helping government agencies, we're helping people do the investigations to help solve these crimes. So the more people we can get this to, the more volume of impact there is. So I see it like a rectangle. It's like the area of a rectangle, and one axis is the volume of the impact, and the other axis is the meaning to you. I will talk about the tech debt in just a sec, because I think that's a really good question. I love talking about this. So I will give you a good I'll give you an answer that I feel like is going to share my perspective on it. On the other side, when we talk about impact, I'm going to talk about what I do at Microsoft. So this is again, I'm not knocking what we do. I think it's very impactful, but the meaning behind that, like when I talk about the deployment team, the meaningfulness behind that does not resonate with me the same way that saving kids does. It's just the reality. I'm not as passionate about that as I was for helping save kids. I would argue the same thing when I work on the routing team. It's not a bad thing to say this. I'm just being, honest about my reflection. I don't have the same passion for a routing plane that I do for saving kids. That's just how my values align. But I talked about these two axes, right? The area of the rectangle, the volume of impact that we have at Microsoft, at least on the teams that I've been working in, is ridiculously big. When we talk about the routing plane, so I don't manage the whole thing. There's a partner group engineering manager that's sort of my manager, who has ownership over the whole space. But I own parts of this. Those are my responsibilities to manage. Like in our group, we route trillions of requests per day across the planet, right? For tons of users, for tons of companies. Like, it's insane. The volume is just insane. I don't even know what a trillion looks like. I can't imagine a trillion of anything. It's such a huge number, and that's every day. So the volume is the other element here. So yes, I do think that there is meaning there. Being able to help make sure that we can keep all of these things accessible for individuals with low latency, making sure that we can protect our services from attackers and things like that. Yes, there is meaning. But the volume is just very different in some of these big tech companies. Okay, couple questions in the chat. How to push business people to reduce tech debt? I prefer we should fix something that's not broken. But things must be serviceable too, as in the long run, it's going to impact the business workflow. Okay. And Giovanni, I just saw your question come in on Instagram, so I will come to that after I read one of the other comments here. So, because I realize the chat's not shared across these platforms, it's a bit of a mess. Okay, so to Ramesh's question here about tech debt, the way that I like framing this is that I feel like the conversation, shouldn't. Okay, I figured that was the case. I prefer we shouldn't fix something that's not broken. So yes, I would agree. And like stereotypically, what I've seen happen, and like I said, I was an engineering manager developing software at the same time. I literally had to live both sides of this exact conversation for 8 years, which is why I like to talk about it. And at a startup. Okay, so when we talk about this type of thing, I feel like stereotypically people that love being in code over-index on code needing to be like more clean, architected better. And it's not wrong for them to say like, hey, this could be better. Yeah, hey, we should invest time into this. They're going to have a perspective about what that code looks like, how easy it is to work in, how testable it is, how brittle it is. They will have an understanding of all these things. And they're valid, right? I'm not trying to dismiss the fact that someone will look at code and say, hey, we can do this better. So I think that's important. But I think what breaks down is two things. One is communication. Communication is sort of at the root of everything. And I feel like it's the cause of every problem is bad communication at some point. But communication and alignment of values slash priorities. So, what does that mean? When we talk about communicating these things, and even Ramesh, in the way that you've asked this question, how to push business people to reduce tech debt, right? This tells me that what it sounds like is that the engineering team is trying to say to individuals who are the product owners, hey, this tech debt is something we need to go address. And the product owners are going, I think we need to go deliver features. I'm making assumptions here, but I think that's probably what's happening. So if that's the case, even the way that this question's been framed is like, how do we convince them? That's a communication thing. And I think traditionally what happens is that developers, programmers, they get frustrated because they just won't listen. They won't schedule the tech debt. They don't think it's important. We know it's important. This is going to be a disaster if we don't address it. But what's actually happening is, like I said, two things. It's not being communicated clearly. And what I mean by that is not to say that you're not trying or that people aren't having conversations. Maybe they're not. But even if you are, it's not being communicated effectively. How do we communicate effectively? Well, we need to understand the audience that we're speaking to. So, for example, if you were trying to convince, and I don't know if Maria is still on the call here. Maria, I know from LinkedIn, we've done a live stream and a recorded podcast together, which I thought was awesome. Maria is very big on communication. Like, this is a huge part of software development. She's a coach for language and communication as well. But being able to communicate clearly is critical. And when we talk about clear communication, this is understanding the audience that you want to deliver the message to. It's going to sound kind of funny when I say this, but when you're talking about tech debt and the importance of it, you are trying to sell this idea to someone else. And how do we sell things to other people? I realize this is a weird way to put it, so I apologize if it doesn't totally resonate with you. But to sell things to other people, we need to talk about it in a way that they are going to value it. And I'm going to say that again. We need to talk about it in a way that they will value it, not in a way that you value it. Maybe you align on the same things, and that's totally cool. That's great. But they need to understand the value of it. And that means that it's not a matter of you repeating things in a way that you go, this code sucks. This code is brittle. This pattern isn't good. We don't have tests in this space. They don't care. And people don't like to hear this part either. Your customers don't care. They don't. They don't know what tests you have. They don't know what language it's written in. They don't know when the last commit was. They don't know any of that. What they do know are these other things that you should be caring about and communicating. The side effects of these things. When you have a brittle code base, you're making changes, you're breaking stuff, you're either shipping bugs, or you can't ship anything because you're constantly fixing bugs. Right? So these are things that your product owner is going to care about. They will care about, if you're explaining to them, it's going to slow us down to the point, and you have like tangible examples, we cannot deliver things for the business because of this. For example, we have this feature coming up. Again, this isn't part of the code base. We're going to have to go extend this, add this feature. If you're able to point to and say, this part of the code base has no tests on it, we can't add the test because we have to go spend some time refactoring or rewriting things. Like we've seen in the past, 3 or 4 examples of us touching areas of code like this. Our estimates were way off. We spent way more time fixing bugs, or we had bad feedback from customers with breakages. This is one of those opportunities. We don't want to repeat that. And finding examples, I'm kind of, obviously this is a very quick example as I go through it, but you want to be able to highlight these types of things and make it something that the product owners can understand. They do not care about the same things you might as a developer, but ultimately, because the other thing I mentioned was values, ultimately your teams should be aligning on the value, which is important. The more that you and your team can discuss things like what you value together, the weight of those values, jokes on TikTok, jokes on them. I don't care at all. Yep. Yeah, I guess so. The more that you can align on the values of these things, the easier these conversations can become. So communication is required from both sides. I'm not just saying, hey, programmers, hey, developers, you suck at this, it's all on you. It is absolutely from the other side as well. People need to find a way to meet in the middle. But I'm just trying to articulate to you that your product owners do not care about, oh, there's no tests. They care about the side effect of there being no tests. And that needs to be explained in a way that they can understand. So I hope that kind of helps. I realize it's kind of generic advice, but it's without really specific examples to walk through, and me knowing your team dynamics, it's really difficult to get into the weeds of it. Yeah, and then sorry, I'm reading comment on Instagram. People hate being sold stuff, but they love being able to relate and solve a problem that is dear to them. Yes. Yep. So again, you're finding ways where people go, oh, like, okay, that makes sense. I can see why. But trying to convince like a product owner that's not in the code and writing software all the time is going to be tricky if you're just saying, hey, we want to make it clean. So again, I hope that helps. And Maria's here, so I can't agree more on the importance of communication skills. Thanks for sticking around, Maria. And it's vital to take into account what others care about their goals, then it's easier to negotiate. I think, great example, I think negotiate is a better word than to sell. It's kind of, I'm trying to say like convincing other people, but I think even, I think Maria has a good point. Like negotiate is a very good word to use here because I think that does a better job of illustrating that it is a balance and you're meeting in the middle. Bloody Pouch on TikTok says, I only care about dev experience. Well, I think dev experience is important, but what's importanter for a company to stay alive is shipping value to customers. And in order to keep doing that, yes, you will need to have a good dev experience or else your developers will stop shipping value to customers. So it is a balance. Infected FPS, to your point, in fast-paced dev, in a larger corp, definitely happens, but it starts fast and slows down the closer you get to production, at least the company I work for. Yep. So these things like the pacing and stuff will change. Giovanni had a question on Instagram. How do you feel to be part of a giant company? I think when you were in startups, you had more power of decision, weren't you? So let me know if I'm wrong, please. Sure. So yeah, I had a lot of autonomy where I used to work. Because I was there since basically right at the beginning, I had a lot of influence. I had a lot of sort of experience to back those things up. So I felt like, given that experience, I could talk about things in a way where people would say, oh, okay, like, great, you have an opinion, and then I could back it up and say, and here's why, and here's a bunch of evidence, and people would, I'm going to use the word respect that, like they would say, okay, like that makes sense, that we can relate, we can rationalize that. So I feel like I had a lot of autonomy, I had a lot of influence. Kind of interesting, like at that company, I've talked about this before, like job levels they weren't really a thing, like kind of were, like we basically had just recently introduced like a senior developer position, but there was nothing above that at the time. I think they have staff engineers there now. I don't know all the details since I've left. But for me, as a technical manager, they technically, no pun intended, they didn't have any career progression beyond that. So I had peers that were being and people, sounds kind of funny, people that I hired to be my peers were being promoted into director positions because they were engineering managers that were not technical engineering managers. They created a tier above that to be directors. I believe if I would have stuck around there, I would have been at director level at this point. I don't want to say VP necessarily, but this would have been something that I would have been pushing for, and I would have been there since the beginning, driving this type of impact at a broad level. I know they brought in executives and they've done they've done a great job. Like they've been very successful. I didn't mention this, at least in this conversation. That company IPO'd after I left. And then they got bought back to private for $2 billion. They were successful, and they are successful to this day. So, yeah, Giovanni, to your point, I had a lot of influence, and that's something for me. I think that was very motivating to be able to be. There was a lot of like trust that was given to me from my leadership. I feel like I have a lot of trust from my current leadership, but the scope of influence I can have, I don't feel like is the same. I can have influence across the entire company where I worked before. And I don't mean that in like a malicious way, like I'm going to control it, but like I feel like if someone said, hey, we got to solve this problem, we got to work on this challenge, here's a new space, that I would have trust given to me for my leadership, and I would have autonomy to go basically be resourceful and go solve any problem within the company. I don't have that where I work now. So that's definitely something that's missing, something I kind of miss. But like I said, given my situation with my current manager and everything, I feel like there is a lot of trust, there is a lot of autonomy. It's just not the same scale, if I can put it that way. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question, Giovanni. Dan, so let me go back. So Noda Ann, what company did you work in, and what was your salary? I'm not going to disclose my salary where I used to work, because I don't think that's totally relevant. But and sorry, I don't mean to say that your question's not a fair one to ask. I don't think that me providing that number to you is going to help in any way that I can see. So I'm going to omit that part. I worked at a company called Magnet Forensics. When I started there, it was called JAD Software. The founder's name was Jad. Good name for a software company after yourself. And then as it was growing, him and his business partner, so founder and then the CTO, they both renamed it to Magnet Forensics. So you can Google Magnet Forensics. That's where I kind of have the overwhelming majority of my work experiences from Magnet Forensics. Dan, how do you visualize 1 trillion plus requests at your current role? At what point is it prohibitive? A really good question. It's challenging because you need to, the systems that we use to go aggregate data like that, you're certainly not looking at individual points. So it's not like you go plot a scatter plot graph and it's here's 1 trillion points on it, like absolutely nothing like that. But we have to use, like we have to bucket things. We have to use time ranges that are acceptable. So if you were, for example, if you were like, hey, I just need to go aggregate data across all 1 trillion of requests in 24 hours, it's like it's not going to work. So we have to filter things down. So for example, when we're working with our firewall policies and we want to know how effective they are and that type of thing, we will filter data in a way that gets us a reasonable data set. So I would say trying to even visualize 1 trillion requests, that's already prohibitive. So ideally, when we talk about that kind of thing, it's more about the different situations that we're looking at. So if we're trying to look at effectiveness of certain things, we're trying to look at different traffic patterns, we scope things into a way that makes it more manageable, because even just as an example, even with 1 trillion requests, what types of patterns would one hope to see just by having all 1 trillion? Like we need a little bit more to start going on, right? So, oh, there's 1 trillion requests per day and we are looking at a DDoS attack. Okay, well, what are some characteristics about the DDoS attack we've seen? Okay, let's look at those. Or we have a service that's inaccessible or something. Okay, there's 1 trillion requests per day, but we're only talking about the service that's inaccessible. How can we start scoping that down and make sense of it? So it's just about focusing that data. Bloody Pouch, you have autonomy at Stardust because no one else is gonna do it. And I think, so yeah, I can't tell if I sense like a little bit of sarcasm or not, but like, yeah, I think this is true. And I think that it takes a particular type of attitude and so sort of like proactiveness to kind of dive into that. if that makes sense. Like if you had a team of people working at a startup and no one was proactively trying to solve challenges, I think you'd be in a bad spot real fast. There's a bunch of questions. This is super cool. I'm going to jump across platforms, and I apologize because I realize people can't see the chat across TikTok and Instagram, so I got to go between them. On Instagram, do you believe that at some point an IC has to become people manager to grow? Absolutely not. I will explain this. AKA, what does senior principal software architect do next? Okay, so at some level, I would say, and we even see this at Microsoft for the high level individual contributor positions, even those ones end up getting some type of direct reports. But I almost think that that ends up happening because you have people that are so technical that their leadership needs to also be so technical to be effective. Sounds kind of weird, but traditionally, I absolutely do not think nor encourage that individual contributors become managers. I think it's an anti-pattern. And the reason I say that is because engineering managers, this is my opinion from my experience, engineering managers are a people-first role. Software engineering involves people, absolutely. Both involve technology, both involve people. But in my opinion, to be a successful engineering manager, you are putting people first. If you do not enjoy working with people problems as a priority, you will not enjoy being an engineering manager. It's going to feel like a ton of friction. And quite honestly, I feel like individuals that are not aligned with that get promoted from an IC into an engineering manager position, they sometimes struggle because, one, none of us get management training. I don't know why that's a thing that's just left out, which sucks because, like, we're going to be the people that are managing the individuals and trying to help them level up in their careers, but no one's even taught us how to manage. Kind of weird. But I think that individuals that are strong ICs that are used to feeling sort of valued externally, but also from like how they feel accomplished from their individual contributions, it feels very challenging to go, it's not about me. It's not about what I deliver. It's about me leveling up the team and helping everyone deliver better as a whole. So I don't think, let me back up. I don't think that for a company to force engineers to become people managers is a good pattern. I think having the opportunity to, especially once you start getting up higher and higher, to kind of say like, hey, you're having so much influence over these groups of people. Does it make sense that you have a couple of ICs that are like, if you're like a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, that's extremely high level. Maybe you'll have a couple of principal engineers or some architects reporting to you, because those types of people are also going to want to have a manager that's like extremely technical like that. That kind of thing comes up. But I hope that kind of answers my perspective on it. Okay, from Facebook, what's your advice for remote developers and how to cope with constantly changing dev ecosystem? Good question. I think for remote developers, one of the best things you can do, this is kind of a general thing, is, and it shouldn't be all on you, but you should be proactive about this. Do try to stay engaged. Do be asking questions. Try not to, like, that sense where you're like, man, I feel isolated, like the team's not around me. Maybe they're all in the office and you're not. Maybe everyone's remote. Try not to let that feeling of isolation win. And I don't want that to sound cheesy, but I kind of, like, I mean it. Like, instead of being like, hey, I'm stuck on this task, tried some things out, or I need some clarity, but like, I don't want to bother other people. Other people are busy. I don't want to bother them. Like, don't give in to these thoughts. Like, imagine that you were sitting there with your team and you could turn to Jim or Susan or whoever and say like, hey, got this question. Could you help me for a sec? You know, you look over at them and they're chatting with someone else and you say, hey, by the way, like, you got a second? Could you help me with this? Like, if you kind of picture that you're working with your team like that and not being hesitant to reach out for help or reaching out to work with other people, I think that you can go a very long way working remote. some of the biggest struggles I see with remote work end up being that like we are isolated, but then people don't use the tools to try and unisolate themselves. They kind of just stay that way and feel almost trapped, like they're isolated. So I do encourage engineering managers, leaders, and entire teams to try and promote that closeness, right? Base paint. I'll come back to that point just after because I was reading the question off of Instagram and I want to clarify that if it was confusing. So for Facebook, on the I hope that kind of helps for the remote developer part. Like basically find ways to be engaged and try to promote that culture within the team. How to cope with constantly changing dev ecosystems. This is challenging because I don't have a lot of experience with that to offer advice. But I would say couple things is one, try to develop a team culture where the dev ecosystem to set that up at least should be very low effort. So if it isn't, make it better for the next person. Document it, automate it, whatever you have to do. And for yourself, if you're constantly going through this type of thing, try to look at kind of like even with programming languages and frameworks, like try to look at the common things that you can abstract from it. I'm going to jump down to Base Paint's question on Twitch just because I don't want to go too far away from this other question. So I'm not following the last train of thought. What's the difference between distinguished individual with 5 people reporting to them and a manager? Difference is that the size of the team and the specialization, strictly. In general, I'm still not a fan of it. Like, still not a fan, but you might find that in these types of situations, the specialization and the narrow focus that you might have to have on some of these individuals for management, like they don't want a lot of hands-on. They don't need a lot of hands-on. They don't want a lot of hands-on, and they want more of their conversations to be about very technical things. That might work okay. I still don't love it, so I don't recommend it. But if that's an option and it happens to kind of fit some business needs, that might be valuable. So Base Paint, I hope that helps clarify. It's not the way that I would recommend it. I do see that kind of thing happen, and I think that it can be successful based on those constraints. Back up to Dan's question or comment. So digital forensics, but a balance of what's acceptable fidelity loss. Yeah. Not trying to be funny, but it's not App Insights. No, so we don't we don't use App Insights. This is more like I would say App Insights is probably like for apps. On the platform side of things, like we're talking about like tons of services across, like thousands and thousands of machines across the planet. So not quite the same. So it's a lot more sort of like a big data problem at that scale. Ramesh, we as devs have such situations where a client demands specific tech stack for their products, and sometimes it brings on extra layer of learning curve and increases delivery time. Is it okay? Is it okay to be client choices? I think this depends on what you're building, honestly. If you are building stuff, like if I back up and you ask me this question in general, I would say if you have a situation where your customer is telling you the solution, I think that's backwards. Is a general sense. When I speak in generalizations, I want to be very clear that there's absolutely always outliers to any type of sweeping generalization. I will be the first to admit it, which is why I'm emphasizing this. In general, I would say if a customer comes to you and they say, this is the solution, what's missing from that statement is this is the challenge we're facing that we need help with. So if they give you, this is the challenge we're facing, and here's a solution, I think the engineering part is supposed to be, here is a solution that we recommend for solving your problem. When you are presented a solution, generally I think that it's like you're not doing the engineering work as much to deliver on that. Maybe there's other constraints and it's about making it a reality. So, of course, it's a generalization for me to say, no, I don't agree with that. There might be situations where, depending if you're consulting and you have a customer that needs some type of platform that needs a specific technology, I could see that coming up for sure. But if someone came to me, I'm just making this up, and they were like, hey, we need you to do this consulting work. We need an application I'm just going to pick something dumb, an e-commerce site, and it must be built with an ASP.NET Core backend. You have to use a Microsoft SQL Server, and you need to have it in, I don't know, you need like this front end for it. Like it needs to be a React front end and has to, I would start to kind of question that, like, why? And if they could, if there's a reason for it, like, oh, because we're reselling this and to other developers to go build on top of, and like those are the developers that we need to hire for, like, sure, I don't know. But I would much rather be in a situation where the customers are telling us challenges and we are solving the challenges they have and making the technical decisions for that. So that's my general framing for that. Maria says, when my client transitioned from tech lead into management, he told me he was surprised by the amount of meetings and the absolute necessity for excellent communication skills. He was even laughing that he got into tech because he thought it would just be him and his computer and zero interactions with people. And now it's about 95% interaction with people. 100%. Literally recorded a podcast this morning with someone that I really look up to and admire from back home in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, successful entrepreneur. And his business now, this podcast will probably be out in 2 weeks' time. His business now is called Chocolate Soup, super cool name. And they focus on sort of like employee recognition opportunities. So when we were chatting in the podcast, it sounds kind of funny to say this, but I kept saying, like, it's about like working in teams of software engineers. We still need to treat people like people. And it seems like it should be so easy, but sometimes it feels like apparently it's work, because otherwise, like, why wouldn't it be easy? Why doesn't it feel like we're working with our friends at work, right? Like, why does it feel like as a manager, like it's extra effort to try and acknowledge people and to say good work on this and to, you know, to recognize them and appreciate them? Like it shouldn't feel like that. So it was a really interesting conversation and a good reminder to Maria's point. Like, there's a lot of people interactions. I've said this before and I will keep saying it, but I feel like the biggest challenges in software engineering are not technical challenges. Engineers are super smart people. We will solve technical problems. We don't seem to be so great at people challenges. We struggle a lot with that. LinkedIn user, kind of weird. Sorry, the name's not coming through, so I can't see what your name is. I apologize. I've thought right now for about 95% of developers works remotely. I don't know what the stats are in remote development. I'm sure it's been shifting dramatically, kind of both ways over the last few years. I don't have stats though. I would wager a large majority of developers are working remotely. There has been a big return to office movement. Some have given up on that. Others are still pushing for it. So I do suspect a lot of remote work though. One last question. Can remote devs aspire to be managers, or is it better to stick to the IC? I don't think that that's dependent on being remote or not, personally. I'm biased because I worked in person for a long time. I'm biased because I was made a manager a few months into working at a startup. So my experience is different. So that's my bias. But I'm trying to think, like, as a manager right now, if I had individuals on my team that work remotely and they said, hey, Nick, I'm interested in focusing more on being a manager, I would try to support that however I can. So, okay, can I find mentorship opportunities for this person? Like, whether that's bringing on interns, whether that's, if they're senior engineers, principal engineers, helping them guide more junior engineers, that kind of thing. I would just be trying to build up that skill set for them and have those opportunities. If I don't have that opportunity in my team for them to be a manager, I still want to skill them up and give them the opportunities. It may very well mean that they have to go to apply to another team in Microsoft and go transfer to that, which would suck to lose someone. But like, I don't think people think about it this way, but especially if you're not in a management position, it sounds funny. I got to preface that. I would much rather lose someone by helping them grow into a position they want to be in than basically keep someone, have them start underperforming, start wanting to leave for other reasons because I just didn't help them grow. So I would much rather invest the time, give them those opportunities, keep them super engaged, doing awesome work. And then at the end of the day, if I don't have that opportunity, say, hey, look, there's this other team that's nearby. Like, I want to keep them close, right? There's this other team. Like, let's see if we can get you to apply for that position. If they have to leave the company, like, that sucks for sure. But they're going to leave anyway. Like, if that's what they want to pursue and you can't give them that opportunity, they're going to leave. Whether that's them getting disengaged and kind of falling into a spot where they're like, crap, I need to leave because this sucks, or because you gave them all of those opportunities, unfortunately didn't have a role and they have to go look for it, right? It's going to happen inevitably. So I'd much rather do the positive thing, build a good relationship, get great work out of them, and then see them succeed somewhere else. So it's hard, but did you jump jobs every few years? Absolutely not. I stayed at the same company for 8 years. Opinion on using jumping to increase salary? Yes, this is a very common thing. So it's a very common thing for people to jump. I think the reality is that this works. I think there's just data that shows that this works. If your goal is to have higher compensation, jumping jobs every couple of years is a strategy for that. Like, I just think that it is. Especially some larger companies have sign-on bonuses and things like that. And I say that I'm trying to be like sort of unbiased in how I say that, because I think it is a fact. I think that if you jump companies every couple of years, you can work on maximizing compensation. But it's a question. Opinion on using jumping to increase salary? Yes, does work. Now, if you change the question, you say, do I recommend doing it? My answer is not necessarily. And I want to exaggerate the example. Okay. So if you could jump jobs every year, 6 months to a year, let's say you're just jumping jobs because you applied for something and like all of your energy is going into like, I'm going to apply for this job and kind of like level up and get the next salary and then a next compensation band and then go to another company and keep doing this. If you could hyper optimize for this on paper, you might say, holy crap, like my compensation's going way up. But the reality is you reach a point where you've hyper focused on this, and very likely at some point you can't actually do your role effectively anymore. And it's because you've trained yourself to go apply for jobs, right? If this is all you're doing, is all of your energy goes into this. Again, I'm taking the example to an extreme. In a few years, you reach a very high level of engineering because you've kind of found your way through this. And then you're in your role and you're like, I can't do my job because I don't actually have much experience. I haven't been spending the time doing the important things. So I think there is a middle ground. And I always try to remind people, like, you should have an understanding of like what your value is. It's going to look different for everyone. Some people don't want to go through the effort of applying for jobs and switching jobs. And like, that's totally cool. Some people don't want more responsibilities. The more people I talk with and interview on my podcast, the more that I hear that some people are like totally content at their jobs. They have a good work-life balance, right? They're just happy. And then I've heard this, and I never thought that I would, but people were telling me, and some different cultures, like people will turn down promotions. Or like, nope, I don't want the extra responsibility. That's okay. No thanks. So I think that there's a middle ground. So if you're at a place and you're not feeling valued and you're feeling like your compensation is not what you deserve, I think you should always be trying to work at a place that compensates you for a value that you feel like you're worth. And I think that's kind of just the general way that I put that. So I hope that helps. Some companies make it a requirement to be an in-person manager. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be constraints on different companies for sure. Could you share your experience working with developers that got time difference for about 12 hours? Yes. So I work with engineers that are in Suzhou, China. We are in exact opposite times of the world. It's interesting. It's super cool. I think you need a lot of really good communication. You need clarity about what's going on. This works super well for us with our on-call rotations. It's called follow the sun, right? So in our daytime, we can be on call solving live site incidents for our platform. When they come online, we do good handoffs. We can make sure that there's continuity. It works really well. On the traditional work side of things, I think you have a couple of different approaches. Sorry, I got to block someone from this chat. What's going on, man? Get out of here. Spamming in my Twitch chat. You can have a couple of different strategies. You can have dedicated projects and stuff so that you don't have coupling between the time zones, because that can be challenging. Or you can purposefully have the coupling. You split up the work, but you have people work in the same project area so that they have an understanding of how things are being built. You have the team's involvement. And then when it comes time for supporting it, you have different geographies and time zones that can support it. So I hope that helps. It's kind of a general thing. There's a lot of awesome questions in this chat. I'm super excited that you guys are involved here. I see a couple questions about golden handcuffs, so I'm going to talk about those and then come back. So golden handcuffs, this is just an opportunity cost. So it's up to you. Depends what the number is, what you're comfortable with. I'm gonna click it. Don't click it. Do not click the link. I can't delete it from the restream chat, but I blocked the person. So don't go clicking sketchy things. I think you have to understand what your number is, right? So if you have a compensation package and you have to stick around, make up an example, right? Just to keep it easy. If you get, say, looks awesome, you get 100 grand, you get $400,000 and it's $100,000 a year over 4 years. The way that I would, and this is going to be different for everyone, but like, if you assume that the stock price isn't going to change, let's say, could you just assume that that feels like you're making $100,000 a year? And if you are interested in that, like if that is part of how you view your compensation, whether that's going into your savings or however else you'd like to use that, when you're applying for your next job, is there a sign-on bonus? Is there a compensation package that's going to pay you out similarly to make up for that? But I feel like it's an opportunity cost. So I realize that's a very like generic answer, but I think that you just have to kind of do that analysis for yourself, because like I can't advise on that, certainly. I know you're not asking for that, but my opinion is like if you're in a situation where you have golden handcuffs, for folks that aren't familiar with what that means, it's kind of like you have a very good offer for money, but it's not realized yet. You have to stick around a little bit longer, right? Some of the when I was interviewing with Amazon before Microsoft, some of the compensation packages felt like they were heavily skewed to be a very golden handcuff situation. Big stock grants for signing on. You would get 5% in the first year out of 4. I think it was 4 years, and 5%, and then 15% the second year. So 2 years, you only get 20% of your huge stock package. And then everything was heavily loaded in the last like year 3 and 4. So it's interesting because by that logic, it kind of forces you to be like, I have to be here for at least 3 years to really realize like the benefit of this. But that's just it. Like you have to kind of think about the time you want to stay in the company and then try to balance that out. If your goal is to maximize how much you're earning, that's a factor. I will say, because I realize that not everyone has like this like luxury or opportunity at this point in their career. Some of the compensation packages and stuff you'll see online, they seem kind of ridiculous. Like how is anyone making that kind of money? And for different individuals, you will have a different point of income where it's just like your needs are being met, you're living comfortably, you're not concerned financially, you're not like paycheck to paycheck being like, oh my God, how is this going to happen? Once you go past a certain point of that, it starts being like what do you need to buy a new Lamborghini every year? Like probably not. Like I'm exaggerating, right? But there's going to be situations where some of these comp packages are crazy. But I've talked about this on other podcast episodes and live streams, but it's kind of hard to show. But I have a tattoo on my arm. I can never figure out how to show this because the camera's mirrored. There we go. It's showing. It's an hourglass and it shows money falling into an empty pit. And I have this tattoo on my arm as a permanent reminder that's do not just do things for the sake of money. Do not just work to make a number go up in a bank account because it's not fulfilling. And you will die someday, because we all do. And you will say, great, I maximized a number. Like high score. And then you're dead. So I think it's important to try to get what you're valued at so that you can live comfortably, so you can be happy, to try and move some of those stressors that finances will have on you. Make sure your family supported, all that. I think it's very important. Beyond a certain point, it stops having such a big impact. And that will look different for everyone. Infected FPS. I'll be biased. The people that jump every few months to a year might be might be the ones who have to handhold on certain things. Might be my industry insurance, though. It's possible, right? That could be your experience for sure. I think that's fair to kind of chime in on that. I got it. Communication skills are vital for success. Yep. Sell, negotiate, analogy offers the right insights. Thanks, Nick and Maria. Awesome. Thanks, Ramesh. I hope that really helps. Base paint. I can see the parallels with contractors. They get hired on to do a job, handed off, meaning they never get a chance to see the long-term consequences of their choices. Yeah. On that note, when I was doing prototyping, it's kind of interesting because we would build things and then hand it off. But I think that one of the things we did well was that, at least, we were around at the company for a long time. We got to see these products grow up. And sometimes these were products that we would own. Like, they'd be feature areas that we would own, and we would be growing them. And then they would reach a point where we're like, okay, like, we can let our baby go. And then the whole team would kind of form around it. And that worked well for us because it wasn't just a, hey, build it and forget it, drop it. Like, you don't care about it, your job's done. But I can definitely see situations where that would be the case. Burhan from Facebook, Morningstar, modular monolithic versus microservice architecture. Yeah. Modular monolith is definitely the phrase of the last couple years, I guess. I'm guilty. I use this and I say it a lot too. I think people for a while over-indexed on microservices because it sort of is like the epitome of decoupling things and making things modular, and everyone's excited about that. But I think the reality is that, like, an overwhelming majority of software that gets built just absolutely does not need it. It looks amazing on paper because you talk about these decoupling aspects and the things are modular, and it all looks good, but we don't talk about the complexity and the overhead of that. So if you're a single developer, small group of developers, you will be paying an enormous overhead for trying to manage those things when you don't yet have that problem. So personally, in all of my projects outside of work, I build modular monoliths. You can call them by any name you want, but it's a monolith. I just happen to write modular code. Everything I write is basically plugins, so it's like as modular as it gets. And I over-index on that. So I'll put my hand up and be the first person to say, like, it's not right to make everything a plugin. I just love doing it, so sue me. Please don't sue me. But I like building monoliths, and because I write software in a modular way, if I found that I had to go scale out something to be its own service, my effort to go refactor that out, extract it, or write like a new entry point service would be lightweight. It would be low effort, and I could do it. Like losing a ton of stock. Okay, so back to Dan here. So like losing a ton of stock that wouldn't get if you switch. Yeah, should you try to compensate for that loss and push for a larger signing bonus? I would, for sure. Why not? I absolutely would. I'm not in that position, but I would absolutely do the negotiation. Try to, like, the thing is, if you're in a position where this is back to the golden handcuff conversation. Sorry for jumping around a little bit. There's a lot of good questions and comments. So on the golden handcuff comment, if you are like, oh crap, if I leave now, I'm losing 200K over the next 2 years, right? It's $200,000 gone. I'm just making numbers up. You might say, okay, look, if I sign on at this other company, it's going to refresh some of these pieces. Maybe it's not going to get me to like where I wanted to be. Okay, can I go negotiate and ask for a larger signing bonus or a higher stock grant that's going to push me there, get me close, maybe surpass? Great if it surpasses, right? But I think it's important to do that if you truly feel that you're being properly valued. I think, I don't know, kind of like an ethical thing, I guess. But you might find, oh, look, okay, in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's a little bit short over a couple of years or something. And you're like, but this job I'm much more aligned with. Or I've shifted my compensation, just to give you an example. Maybe I'm losing 200K in stock grants over 2 years, and that's being made up for in a cash signing bonus, and my salary's higher. So suddenly you start to feel like maybe you're losing a little bit overall, but you've now balanced out your compensation to feel like it's more sustainable. Just to give you an example. So I think these are things that you have to decide for yourself. It's just an opportunity cost thing, and I would absolutely say negotiate. Okay, sketch links, yeah, please don't click those. Or they turn into microliths, yes. What's your take on .NET Aspire? Where would someone use it? Is it practical or boil the ocean type of thing that is potentially overhyped? So I've talked about this before. I'm building a platform called Brand Ghost, and Dan, I've actually talked to you about this because we chat on Twitter. We're Twitter buds. But yeah, I'm building a platform called Brand Ghost, and we didn't start off using Aspire, but one of the engineers on the team was like, hey, like, we're pretty early, like we should hop on the Aspire train. And I think I missed the initial value prop because we were already set up in Azure, like with some of our services and things like that. And I was like, I don't really get it, but we got this really cool dashboard, and I was like, hell yeah, like the dashboard's really cool. I can see what's up. Really like that. So that's goodness. But I missed the part, and this came after we were trying some things out, and he was like, oh, go run this command locally. And I realized what was happening. It was looking at the code that was written in the Aspire program and standing up these Azure resources. And I went, you mean we didn't have to go configure any of that stuff? It would have just done it for us? And he was like, yeah, man. And it wasn't obvious to me because I'm looking at the code and I'm like, okay, I see this as a program that will go run. And we're currently using it that way. So it makes sense. It's the kind of kicking off a couple services for us when we deploy. Okay, makes sense, cool. Setting up environment variables, cool, whatever. But I didn't realize that there's this, and I don't know how to explain how it actually works yet. It kind of feels like it's using reflection or something to analyze the code. And then it was just honestly like building up Azure resources just by examining things. And I went, holy crap. I just didn't realize we didn't have to go stand up any of it. We run a script locally and it would have gone and done it all. So I think that there's a ton of potential there. The example that I want to give you is kind of like when people talk about Blazor. So I've heard people saying like, hey, like Blazor seems stupid because it's never going to beat JavaScript. And then I go, I don't think anyone said that was the goal. Like, I think you kind of invented this competition that no one's in. Like, Blazor helps people like me, .NET and C# developers, that just want to keep coding in .NET and C#. Sweet. Now I could be more productive. It doesn't mean that it's taking away from your JavaScript land or your TypeScript or your React or anything else. It just helps me. And I feel like Aspire is similar. Like, I am terrible at working at pipeline type things. I'm terrible at working with YAML files. I feel like every time I touch one, I have to go spend a month like getting into the zone. And then finally I'm like, I get it. And then I move away from it and forget all of it. So I'm hoping Aspire is something that works well for people like me. I don't want to have to think about this stuff. I'd love to write C# code and just not have to. I feel like I use the phrase like I'm tinkering. I don't like to tinker with YAML files and configurations and stuff, it just feels like I'm getting nowhere fast. So I think Aspire has a ton of potential. I am currently not leveraging all of the potential that I think is there. As a manager, how do you approach training team members who lack essential skills for a task? Do you prefer one-on-one coaching or providing a resource for self-guided learning? This is situational. One of the things that was taught to me very early on as a manager, I talked about this on the podcast I recorded today with the person that I was introduced by. This is a wordy way to say it. The HR leader that started me off introduced me to the person that I was interviewing. So it was all very relevant. The very first thing that she taught me was situational leadership. And she said, Nick, you're going to be working with people who don't think the same way as you. So when you're trying to navigate problems, trying to motivate them, trying to engage them, you can't just think, how does Nick like this? Because that's what I should do. You have to understand the individual. Not only that, if you have multiple individuals on your team, they may be all very different. So you can't use a cookie cutter and say, great, it worked with Tim. Now Bob and Sally, like, I'm just going to apply the same thing. It's always going to be situational. And I've taken this my entire career, try to embody situational leadership. And I think base paint, your question here for approaching team members who lack essential skills for things. I do think that you need to be situational. So there are going to be things where I might be able to coach someone on something. I've spent a lot of my career trying to coach people that, and this is, by the way, if you follow the content I put out online, because I know some people are dropping in, some people, we engage a bunch on LinkedIn or Twitter. A lot of my content, I try to gear towards people that are getting into software engineering because I've spent a lot of my career doing that already. Whether that's helping people transition from, say, like a testing role into being a developer or anything else. It's just something that I want to try to bring down barriers. So I'm happy to coach people if I have time and I can accommodate that. There's other situations where I might have a more senior engineer coach or mentor someone. There's other situations where people approach me and say, hey, I'm looking for opportunities like this. And I go, great, like, I'm happy to support you, but like, you should be proactive looking for these resources. If you're stuck, let me know. But sometimes, depending on the individual, I'm trying to get them to be proactive to demonstrate that they're serious about it, because some people will make comments like, oh, this is what I want. But then they don't put any initiative into it. So as long as I can make sure they're not blocked to doing it, knowing they have my support, will they take any action? Because if they're not, maybe they don't care that much. So it is a situational kind of thing. I hope that kind of helps. Tabs or spaces. I actually use semicolons for all of my white space instead. No, I'm just kidding. Spaces all the way. How do you manage? It's called Brand Ghost. I'll just type it in the chat. Actually, it's Brand Ghost. That's going to... No worries. That's okay. Brand Ghost. Yeah, so how do you manage Brand Ghost and my full-time employment? So how do I manage anything really? It's some people that see me post how much content I post and stuff online. The answer is actually Brand Ghost. It sounds kind of funny. What is a semicolon? I only know JavaScript. I use Brand Ghost so that I don't have to, and I think it's Brand Ghost AI. Sorry, I tagged the wrong account there. I don't know my own handles. I use Brand Ghost to schedule all of my content. So when people say, hey, Nick, like, it looks like you post so much content, how does that work? It's because I don't go on the social media platforms and post it all manually. I don't schedule my content for the week. I just create content, and I use Brand Ghost to go basically schedule it as necessary. So when you create enough content, my content is recycled. I'm not shying away from it. My content is recycled, but I am constantly making content. The interesting thing is when you recycle content and your audience is growing, and actually if your audience isn't even growing, I'll give you an example. If I make a post on LinkedIn and it gets 1,000 impressions, okay? If I have 17,000 people that follow me on LinkedIn and it gets 1,000 impressions, what percentage of my audience has never seen that post ever? And that's assuming that of those 1,000 impressions, those aren't just my followers. So social media does not blast all of your followers and force them to see your content. So when we're posting things, you're actually not basically letting your entire audience see it just by the way that these algorithms work. So I absolutely repost content. But my strategy, and this is, I think, the two things that separate and why I'm able to do this, is that I post what I call evergreen content. So it's hopefully educational. It doesn't have a time limit on it. It's valuable today, hopefully. It's valuable next week, next month, next year, last year. It's just helpful content. That's the goal. So I will repost it, and I continuously add things. And what that affords me is the flexibility to do all of this. And the very, like, I've been doing this for, it's almost 20 months straight now. I've shared this before. If you follow me on social media, you'll see that I have a link to a blog article every day. Those blog articles, I haven't written a blog because I've been writing brand ghost code. That's where I had to make a compromise. I couldn't write blogs anymore. I haven't written a blog since May or April, aside from my newsletter. I post a blog article every day, like a link to it. And it's because I'm using Brand Ghost, and I'm sharing out my content because it's still valuable content from a few months ago till now. So the type of content I create allows me to do that. Now, how do I go make all the YouTube videos? How do I make courses? How do I do all that? It's just time management. I definitely take too much on my plate. So I'll be the first to admit that. Some things end up dropping. I don't spend enough time with my family. I could be definitely spending more time with my wife. But there are some things where I'm making hopefully shorter term trade-offs for being able to do this kind of stuff. And Brand Ghost right now is how I am trying to make sure that I don't have to spend as much time on social media. Sounds funny. I don't like being on social media. I don't like having to go look for content to go comment on. I just like producing content. I like the conversations. Like I know Dan's in the chat. I think he's still on here. Maria from LinkedIn. Like, I've met tons of awesome people doing this, and I love that. But in order to get impressions and engagement on social media, I just don't have time to be doing that. Outside of natural conversations that come up, I cannot be going to, I post to over 12 platforms every single day. I can't be on all of those platforms trying to comment on stuff and find other people to engage with. I will never be a successful, like, air quotes, influencer. I'm happy to create content, but I will never be like what I call an influencer because I cannot spend that much of my time doing that. So I hope that helps for the Instagram comment. I'm going to jump back over to some of the other questions from the shared chat here. My name is Nick, so that was disorienting. I missed that. That's a good. What's the service called? I search Brand Ghost and nothing comes up. Not on. I don't know what the not on all 12 platforms comment was for. It is. I'm putting it in the chat. It's brandghost.ai. Maybe our we got to do some SEO work, but this is the platform still being built out. But I am building this with people that we iterate very fast. So the first one of the first users we had sign up gave us some feedback. All good stuff. Oh, my chat said it's messed up. I gotta reload it. Sorry if I lose some of the chat here. I hope it connects back again. What? We got clothing e-commerce stores dominating Brand Ghost. No way. We gotta get rid of that. No, the first day we had feedback was incredible because someone gave us the couple bugs here and there, and that's going to happen. It's not going to be perfect ever, so I'm not trying to pretend. But we need the feedback, we need people using it, and we iterate. This is how software is built. So he gave us, I think, like 6 bullet points, like, hey, like, couple things here, there's a bug here, and we fixed it all by the end of the day. And this is like, I was at the office, I wasn't coding it during work. Like, I fixed a couple things before I went to the office, came back, fixed a couple things. The other engineers are in different time zones, they fix some stuff. We iterate, we work hard. There's also Ghost Brands, that is a marketing agency. Well, they better buckle up because we're coming. It's funny, when we first came up with Brand Ghost, I was calling it Ghost Brand, and I was like, oh man, like, no, you got to get the name right. No, but I'm excited. I think this is being built out of something that is my, it's, it is literally my content strategy. And I'm not saying it's the best content strategy in the world, but the proof is like, and I'm not, this isn't me bragging or anything, but if you want to understand if it's effective, this is the framing I would have. I, over the last 20 months, if you look at my presence on different social media platforms, there's people that are way more successful with more followers and stuff. I'm not, this is me not trying to like brag about this. Over the last 20 months of me trying to figure out a way that I can balance posting content in a sustainable way that I hope is educational. If you look at my social media platforms, basically I started routinely posting at the start of 2023. That was last year. So about 20 months. And when I started, I did not have Brand Ghost. I had to come up with this system to do this. So I had to find a way that I could keep posting content and still do everything I'm doing. And I had just told myself, because a lot of people don't know this, I've talked about this a couple times, I tried doing content creation in 2013. This is when I started my blog, and I gave up right away because I could not keep up with posting things and being regular. So I stopped. And then after 10 years went by, I went, holy crap, like, look at all of these people who just stuck to creating content. And I don't have superpowers. I'm not the smartest person ever. That would be nice. I'm not the most charismatic. I'm not the best at YouTube videos and streaming. I'm not, but that's fine. I don't need to be. Because one thing that I do really well is repetitive stuff. I'm very good at doing things every single day. This is why I liked bodybuilding. I will eat the same meal multiple times a day, every day for years. I will go to the gym and do my stuff every day for years. I like routine. I'm very good at routine. So when it comes to posting content, I have trained myself now. You have a routine. And I just built that up. So now I have the system that I use that I've proven, and I said it's time to turn this into a platform. So the system that I built ad hoc is being ported over to Brand Ghost. This is what's been happening for the past few months. And it works. The system works if you are content and happy to build content the way that I do. If you're trying to be viral and have viral posts, like, that's not what I do. Brand Ghost would allow you to have a baseline of content and then ideally give you some time back to go try to make viral posts. So that's a big difference. It looks interesting. Is it your own company? Yes. So this is my own. I do have this that I have some partners with on this. Have you checked out Stream Together? Could be good for AMA streams, allows viewer call-ins. Oh, interesting. No, I've not. I haven't. I do have like a private Discord, and I've talked about doing like making that something where people could kind of call in. I feel like I have heard about Stream Together, but like the name, but I've never like looked into it. So that might be something interesting. CI/CD pipeline, but for content creation, kind of. It kind of is like that. The way that I would frame this is like, as a content creator, the thing that I want to spend time doing is creating content. If you are a small business, so whether you're like a course creator, I actually have a real estate agent that's one of the early users, and he has a roofing company. He is a content creator as well. Like, he understands content creation, and he uses content creation for his businesses. I can tell you what he does not want to spend time doing. He doesn't want to spend time scheduling content. Make the meaningful content, get yourself some time to focus on your business. Like, let us go take care of making sure it's always scheduled. You always have posts ready to go. The thing that we're building after that is an aggregate cross-platform social feed. So when you do need to work on your engagement, commenting on stuff, because that's a big part of all of these platforms, a lot of people don't realize, we want to make sure that we can focus your attention. So you're not like, oh, I have to go find all the stuff to reply to, go find can't speak, accounts to go comment on and engage with. So my goal is, as a content creator, I don't want to spend time doing like the boring stuff about content creation. Let me make content, and then let me get the time back to do the other important stuff. And then we got Justin C. Dev trying to break into our app over here, just poking around. Okay, don't break anything. No, but seriously, yeah, like sign up for the wait list. We're onboarding people. Yeah, happy to have the feedback and stuff. So if you're interested in making content, if you have a small business and you're like, hey, I need a social media presence, but I don't have time to go posting stuff, I want to let me frame this for you. If you are a small business, you have something going on, you just want to have more presence, okay? If you made one post every day for a year, sorry, not every day, sorry, every week, every week for a year, you would have 52 posts created, okay? 52 posts. If every single one of those posts was what I refer to as evergreen, which means you can go repost it later and it's still valuable. It's not like a, hey, flash sale this Sunday only. That's not very evergreen. You would have 52 posts that you could reuse. And that means that your next year in business, those are 52 days worth of posts you never have to think about, because we could just schedule those things again for you. The overwhelming majority of your audience would have never seen them ever in the first place. If you could change it and you could do more content sooner, you could get to a point where every 60, and this, we have an evergreen score in the app. You could have, say, every 90 days, people would never have seen the content you posted. Sorry, it repeats after 90 days. It's a way more scalable way to create content. It's not about trying to cheat the system and say, oh, look, I don't have to, I'm just going to regurgitate my content because I don't care and I'm going to fool these people. Like, the people haven't seen your content. It's just the reality. It's not cheating. And you can always refine it. You can make it better. We're going to build in analytics so you can see these kinds of results and you can say, hey, this post doesn't do so well. Like, I should change the hook. I should change the language in it. All these kinds of things. on Instagram, 10 years went by. I signed up for Twitter in 2013 or so, and I have 0 followers. Totally can relate. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So do you mean to re-upload? Yes. And depending on the platform, it's either a repost or re-upload. So we basically have the content repository for you. We haven't done image and video hosting, so all of your images and videos need to be external links. We just have to build out the Azure storage for it, and then we'll host it for you as well. Reminds me of how GDC works. They have a vault that has all the content and constantly rotates a subset of the data on YouTube. Yep. When scheduling posts, to use hashtags or strictly for your followers. Both. Depends on the platform. So for example, like Threads. Threads, you can have one hashtag. Kind of weird. I wonder if they'll change that. It's very bizarre. So Threads, sometimes I might not even use a hashtag. Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, I will use hashtags. Instagram used to be a thing where you would slam as like up to 30 hashtags just because you want to get exposure. I don't think things work as well that way anymore. I think people have different success with hashtags. Our platform does support that. I'm trying to do a better job of making hashtags feel kind of like a first class type of thing. Kind of a weird thing to explain, but I want people to be able to to use hashtags in a way that if you're just posting stuff, like it can pull from your comments into hashtags, but you can also override hashtags for certain posts. But again, like you want to be able to set this kind of stuff up and forget about it. When you're ready to add more content, you add it. When you want to go update a post because it didn't perform as well, go update it. But it's all about building on what you have and not being at a point where you're just like I don't know, like having to if I had to try and come up with a viral post every day across 12 platforms, I would have given up instantly. It's just not going to happen. Some people do very well with that kind of thing. Some people will say, "Hey, I'm getting into this." There's like sort of techniques you can look at for trying to make viral videos and stuff, like rehooking people's attention, trying to get people to focus in the comments of your videos. So people, especially on Instagram, you'll see like, "Oh, like here's my little reel. It's very aesthetic." And I'm not trying to knock people for it, sorry, but aesthetic reel, and then it's like read the description. So you're kind of checking this thing out because it's very aesthetic, looking at it. Oh, I should read the description. Guess what? When you're there reading there and you're reading the comments, the video's playing. They're getting watch time. It's serving the purpose. So there are techniques and things like that. People can be very successful. I literally do not have time to go do that. Not every day. It's just not something I can focus my attention on. So my platform is built in a way that is sustainable for me creating content, and I think that it's applicable for many people. Yes, and there you go. So Justin C. Dev, this is kind of the point, right? I could see this type of service doing well with this current wave of solopreneur launch SaaS AI product every 72 hours. Yeah, these guys are coding 20 hours a day, grinding out products until one hits. So again, right? Like, and we like we have an AI element in what we're doing for different aspects. What I don't want to have happen, because I see this as a LinkedIn creator primarily, when people are using AI, we would like to incorporate AI to help you with idea generation, to help you take content that exists, rewrite it in ways that's still in your language, like your tone of voice. We want to be able to do that. We are going to do that. We plan on using AI for onboarding your existing content onto our platform. So there's an AI element. However, the goal is not just to be like, press the AI button, and then you get rocket ship emojis and people saying superb or like, this is amazing. Like, it's just, we don't want garbage. We just want you to be able to create content more effectively and get your time back. So as Justin C. Dev is saying, like, when you have these other folks that are trying to build things and focus on building, focus on their business, when you don't make any time for posting about what you're doing and attracting attention, you're missing out. So if you're interested, because this is a neat social experiment, follow the brand ghost accounts on social media. Because do you know how we're building our profile up? I'll give you a hint. I'm not going on to brand ghost and posting every day. Surprise. Kind of like my own accounts. I've told people this, and I've told you on this stream. I do not post, rarely do I post to social media directly. There's a couple that I do. Today on LinkedIn and yesterday on LinkedIn, I made 2 posts of me holding a book. Different books. I did this. These were separate, not scheduled through Brand Ghost, but I did these as separate dedicated posts. Because I already have content for forever on LinkedIn and every other platform. I can just go ahead and do these other posts. It's rare that I post directly. If you see me commenting, different story. If I'm engaging with you in comments, that's me. I'm commenting. But I have more time to do that because I don't have to go make and schedule posts. Yeah, and so, yeah, Justin C. Dev, no, I'm agreeing with you. I think I got that. So, yeah, I think what you said totally makes sense. Basement, yeah, I think high-quality educational content will be in high demand with more AI-generated content flooding the internet. Yeah, it's unfortunate, right? It would be nice if the AI content was just more beneficial, but the more time you spend consuming content online and generating it, you'll see these patterns where it's like it stands out, where it's like it's just not there. So anyway, I went off the rails a lot. I didn't finish. You guys distracted me. I didn't finish the whole thing about the uh, startups and big tech. So that's okay. I have to wrap up the stream though, because I have to go to CrossFit in like 6 hours, which is rough. But folks, sorry for not wrapping up that part. I thought this is probably, I'm being honest here. I think out of all the live streams I've done for topics like this that are very general software engineering, this is hands down the best, most engaged one across all the platforms. There are people from Twitch, Twitter. I had people on Instagram asking questions, which is great. There was people on TikTok. Usually, I'm not blasting TikTok. Usually TikTok's terrible for any engagement. I don't know why. I feel like people can't hear me or something on TikTok. I don't know. But guys, this was awesome. Guys and gals and everyone in between. This is super cool. I do appreciate the engagement. Thank you all. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for asking questions. I am not going to have my coding live stream in the morning. Between, like I mentioned, I'm going to CrossFit in the morning, but between my in-laws being here for a couple more days this week, try to resume things next week, I think will be the goal. But yeah, coding live streams will come back. This particular type of session will be at the same time next week. So I do appreciate you all being here. Thank you for your support. Thanks for folks that engage with me on the different platforms and dropped in for the live stream as well. If you ever miss these, so you're like, hey, I wanted to check it out, but I was busy. These are all recorded, so you can check them out on YouTube. You can watch these on the platform that you're watching them on. And if you hate the platform you're on, you just happen to drop in, pick a different platform, because I try to be on all of them. So thanks, folks. I'm going to go to sleep. And yeah, I appreciate the time. So take care. I hope everyone has an awesome week, and we will see you soon.